You know, it's been quite the journey these last 9 years, doing all these Doctor Who novelizations. Autons reviewed you. Cybermen reviewed you. Daleks reviewed them twice. The Master. The Master. Yes. Reviewed him twice as well. Omega. The Celestial Toymaker. Skagra. Who could forget? Shalka. Shalka. The unproduced series. Why wasn't it produced? Yes, of course Russell brought the show back. Starring Richard E. Grant and Derek Jacobi. And written by Paul Cornell. Oh, Paul Cornell is an exceptional writer. We almost had this instead of New Who. That's right, Lanet about 2003. What a universe that must be. Shalka. 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 Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. It's our 9th anniversary. I know I say this every year, but I never thought we'd make it this far. But to be fair, after last year, I didn't think the Earth would make it this far, but we did. Homo sapiens, what an inventive, invincible species. And I know I used that same reference in the Murderbot video, but to be fair, I wrote it into this script first, so technically that one was reusing it. Come on, it's Doctor Who. If there wasn't complicated temporal stuff, it just wouldn't be right. As always, I am grateful for the support I've gotten over the years from people on Patreon, from people just watching, sharing, liking, and commenting on my videos. And apparently commenting is a bigger deal now, so if you have a comment, leave it. It's good for engagement, I guess. And I hope to continue making YouTube videos for as long as the internet exists. And maybe after, too. You'll just have to find me standing on a street corner like a street preacher, shouting about Star Trek tie-in novels. But yeah, thanks for sticking with me this long, even if I'm not as famous as I thought I'd be back when I started the show in 2012. As is tradition, to commemorate the fact that my first video was a review of the Target novelization of the Third Doctor story, A Spearhead from Space, we continue the run of novelizations, although this one is a first for the show, since it's a novelization of a story that never aired on television. Instead, it novelizes the Scream of the Shalka webcast, which was produced in conjunction with Doctor Who's 40th anniversary in 2003. According to all sources involved, it was originally intended to be the official continuation of Doctor Who, on the same level of canonicity as the 1996 TV movie and the original show. A writer for one of the BBC book's 8th Doctor adventures even included foreshadowing to link the two, but as we all know, Richard E. Grant's Doctor was not to last, and as not even a year out, production began on what would become Series 1 of the modern Doctor Who series, which to this day is still ongoing, and the Scream of the Shalka was left in the world of outdated internet gimmicks. Personally, I think it was for the best. While I like Scream of the Shalka, I don't think webcasts were the show's intended future. Live-action TV is where it started, after all. But that doesn't mean Scream of the Shalka isn't incredible for what it is. It was the first fully animated Doctor Who property, since previous webcasts were little more than still images and limited animation. of Big Finish audio dramas, but this was a fully animated serial. Or at least as fully animated as they could be on the internet in 2003. And when it was commissioned, the idea that there would be another series of Doctor Who on TV, let alone 12 and counting, was as realistic as Boggins from space kidnapping the 1980 Olympic hockey team and forcing them to play against the Gritchalons of Gritty 3 to save Earth from being destroyed. What? It could happen. And heck, it actually contributed in a small way to the animated reconstructions of missing episodes, since the company that did this also did the Invasion's missing episodes. And you know me, if it led to more trouting, it's alright in my book. Anyway, while it is as unofficial as Doctor Who's canon can get, it is still a neat little part of the show's history that I'd like to share with you all. Well, it's 9 years later. Let's see if I've still got it. This is Scream of the Shalka. The cover is fairly basic, but that's par for the course for the BBC Books line. Their covers aren't always very interesting. I'll always prefer the Virgin New Adventures covers. They were always very intriguing. This one isn't bad, though. There's the Paul McGann era logo at the top in front of a starfield, and then underneath that, and the title, we've got the Doctor on the left, the Shalka Prime in the middle, and the Master on the right. He's not working with the Shalka, surprisingly, but we'll get to that later. And oddly enough, it also features circles of almost vinyl-esque lines, which I'm sure are meant to signify the titular scream of the Shalka, but it's also worth noting that Paul Cornell, the author, considers this to be his Unbound story, referencing the Big Finish audio dramas of alternate Doctors released around the same time that featured the same vinyl-esque lines on their cover. Remember Sympathy for the Devil. Coincidence? Perhaps. Anyway, let's get to the story itself. The novel opens up with a meteorite crashing to Earth, and as is typical in these stories, two humans wander up to it and are attacked by the aliens inside. Unfortunately, instead of getting a neat black costume or an Omnitrix, the humans are killed by the alien beings inside, wielding the same powers as the Black Canary, sonic screaming. Meanwhile, the Doctor lands his TARDIS on an empty street, or more accurately, the Time Lords land it, since the vague backstory given states that the Doctor is back to performing missions for the Time Lords against his will. And I guess Romana wasn't elected Lord President in this timeline because she knows better. The Doctor initially refuses to do anything, but they shut the TARDIS down, so he's forced to look around, finding out from the scent of the air that he's in England in 2003 in a village called Lannet. The strange thing is that the streets are completely empty and people seem afraid to leave their homes, even to go out to restaurants or bars. Oh god damn it, I made the promise less than a month ago and I'm already breaking it. From here on out though, no more quarantines and no more ghost towns, I promise. The Doctor goes into a local pub, making the acquaintance of the bartender, Alison Cheney, no relation to Lon, and learns that the people are being subjugated by something under the ground, but other than that, everyone but Alison is tight-lipped about it, and the Doctor leaves to investigate on his own. After a fruitful conversation with an old woman who ends up dead because she gave the Doctor information about what was going on, telling him that all the animals in the village have fled because of what's underground, the Doctor heads to Alison's house, where she's arguing with her boyfriend about how complacent everyone is about the current status quo. Joe, Alison's boyfriend, is a doctor, but like an actual doctor and not like the Doctor, and is complacent because he can't save anyone from what the Shalka are doing to them, which terrifies him. The Doctor bursts in an attempt to figure out what's going on, makes a whole lot of noise to lure out the Shalka, and then to escape them, he blows up Alison's house. Or more accurately, he blows up a hardware store next to Alison's house, but when things are next to each other and those things next to you explode, your house ends up blowing up as well. Which is bad, but the explosion gets the attention of the rest of the country, and the people of Lannet, whoever is left, are evacuated to safety. The Doctor also promises to do whatever he can to save the people of Earth. Unable to return to the TARDIS, since it was stolen by the Shalka, the bioplasmic creatures laying siege to Earth this week, the Doctor is forced to call in a favor for aid, intending for speleologists, but getting some soldiers, although strangely not specified as a unit, despite the Doctor contacting the United Nations Secretary General to get help for Lannet. He aids them in a reconnaissance mission to the Shalka's underground base, but only as a means to an end, intending to just grab the TARDIS and duck out, since the military can probably handle themselves. Unfortunately, despite successfully separating himself from the soldiers, led by Major Kennett, his attention is then drawn by the fact that the Shalka have captured Allison from a rescue convoy, leaving a despondent Joe behind. The Shalka, who are worm creatures, cut Allison's forehead as the Doctor travels through the caves, attempting to contact the TARDIS's other occupant, the Master, or rather an android version of the Master with his mind trapped inside that's bound to the TARDIS.
I may have accidentally invented a boyfriend.
Yeah, I did that once, and there's no easy way to get rid of an android.
The Shalka attempt to breach the TARDIS and succeed, but the Master keeps them at bay with a force field that can reflect their screams back at them. Unfortunately, the TARDIS phone is on the other side of the force field, causing the answering machine to pick up, and the Master remarks about the Doctor needing to change it, as it includes another voice, that of a woman that the Doctor seemed to be close with and yet is strangely absent from the TARDIS. The Doctor is customarily taken to their leader, the Shalka Prime, who the Doctor grills for information in his usual way, and finds out that it's an invasion, since if it was a dying homeworld gambit, they wouldn't have to attack the humans, since the Shalka live underground and the humans don't, and the Shalka Confederacy are using a wormhole to factor into their plans. Although given that the Shalka are worm creatures, they probably don't call it that.
That's really offensive. No wonder everyone keeps invading you.
The Shalka are the type of creatures who believe that they're higher life forms than humanoids, and so believe that they're entitled to the universe, and that the lower life forms don't deserve to live. You know, like billionaires. The Doctor does his usual bravado and intends to hop into the TARDIS to cut and run, but then the Shalka trot out Allison, and the Doctor, because he always cares a little bit too much, is forced to alter his plans. The Doctor agrees to give the Shalka access to the TARDIS if they let Allison live, which the Shalka Prime seems to agree to. The Master is against that plan, but the fortunate part about the Master being an android is that the Doctor has something that he's always wished he had while fighting the Master. An off switch, and deactivates him. Would have made it a lot easier, eh? Peoples of the universe, please attend carefully. The message that follows may be vital to the future. The Shalka aren't very impressed by the TARDIS, and they imprison the Doctor and Allison together in a cell. The two captives have a heart-to-heart, with the Doctor beating himself up because he's unable to be the detached alien observer that the aliens fear, and shows weakness by caring about humanity. While self-flagellating himself, metaphorically of course, he asks Allison why she didn't sacrifice herself to save her village, and Allison remarks that she's not killing herself to save the dullest place in the universe, and was planning to leave Lanet before the Shalka arrived. Although the Doctor notes that Gallifrey probably has Lanet beat in the dull department. As we all know, they need a full council meeting to change the wallpaper color in the Panopticon. You can probably see where this is gonna end, but let's keep going. The Shalka Prime figures out how to work the TARDIS and plans to kill the prisoners, although strangely enough they only plan to throw the Doctor into the black hole against Allison's objections, kept alive for some reason. Following that, the Master reactivates and begins negotiating with the Shalka to save his own skin, as per usual. And Allison is transported back to Joe, who's been met by Sergeant Greaves from Kennett's unit. Knowing he has a limited time left while floating through the void like Major Tom, the Doctor calls Kennett and leaves a message informing him about the black hole and tells him to figure out a way to destroy it, before his phone's battery starts to die. You'd think that the Doctor's phone being part of the TARDIS and it would have like a self-replicating battery or something, but I guess it's meant to charge in the TARDIS, and the Doctor definitely doesn't seem like the type of person to remember to plug in his phone. You know, I wonder if anyone considered while writing this that in under a decade, we'd have portable power banks to charge our mobile telephones or cases that charge the phone for us. However, the Doctor also remembers that the phone is part of the TARDIS, and so with some requisite sonicking, he uses the phone to form a door into the console room. The Shalka aren't happy to see the Doctor, but the Doctor just strolls in, grabs onto the console, and tells the Master to get a grip. A grip onto something sturdy, because the Doctor opens the door back into the black hole, and the Shalka get sucked in, only to end up either ascending to a higher plane of existence, or they go to heaven and hell. Honestly, the ending of that movie was very vague and confusing. And if you thought I was going to go for the low-hanging, spoony, nightmare atmosphere VCR board game joke, you're absolutely right. They enter the Black Hole and are forced to play the Gatekeeper's Challenge, lest they be banished to eternal pain hanging out with the Gate Cleaner and the Gatekeeper for the rest of their meager existence. in America. The Doctor takes the TARDIS over to Kenneth's base camp, where Kenneth is surprised to see the Doctor, since Allison's statement had mentioned that he was banished to the Black Hole, which excites the Doctor since he knows that Allison is alive. They also tell the Doctor that they've captured a Shalka, who the Doctor asks to see. Meanwhile, the rescue convoys are derailed when the people of Lanip begin heading, against their wills, towards specific locations. The Doctor does some research on the Shalka, or more accurately on Greaves, who he left guarding it, realizing that not only do they breathe pure volcanic gas, as he discovered in the caves, but that the Shalka's screaming has a curious effect on humans that modifies their body to produce that volcanic gas. Allison and Jo arrive at their convergence point with all the other townspeople, and they start laying siege to a nearby warehouse, controlled by a small Shalka parasite living in Allison's forehead, explaining the earlier injury and headaches that she'd had while in the cave that the Doctor attributed to the volcanic gas. In fact, there are several Shalka envoys leading similar charges around the world at specific locations. The Doctor and the military get involved, naturally trying to avoid civilian casualties, although the world governments are willing to bomb the people to stop it, since the people aren't doing it on purpose, and the Doctor figures out the Shalka's plans, to use the humans to produce the volcanic gas that they need to breathe, and alter the atmosphere so that they can survive on the surface and take over the entire planet for the glory of the Sontaran Empire. I mean, Shalka Confederacy. Easy mistake. It also means that the atmosphere will process solar radiation differently, which means that instead of a nice tan, you'd be likely to be burned alive if you stepped into the sun. It's like the Shalka took becoming a vampire and stripped out all the fun stuff. No immortality, but the sun still kills you. What a crock! The Doctor manages to snap everyone out of it by removing Allison's parasite, and passes out from getting hit by a sonic blast. Upon awaking, he sets off to handle the final stages of saving the Earth, with enough time to both save the planet and stop the world governments from bombing their own people, since they're prepared to sacrifice those small groups for the greater good. The Doctor isn't, though, and takes Allison and the TARDIS back down into the Shalka's caves, with the Master also trying to hypnotize Allison, but is interrupted by the Doctor, fresh off some meditation to clear his mind. After confronting the Shalka again, the Prime tells the Doctor that they target worlds with ecological problems, and cites worlds that the Doctor and the universe at large believe destroyed themselves, but in fact the Shalka finished them off. But unlike certain other stories I could mention, this isn't some heavy-handed climate metaphor where the ending is all about how humans could save ourselves from that future if we just tried. The Doctor declares that the Shalka are death incarnate, and sets about to do what Grace Holloway became a doctor to do, hold back death. See? I knew I could find a way to connect this to last year's video. And to do that, the Doctor eats the parasite and uses it to join the Shalka hive mind and work out how to stop them by learning how to use their language and technology. Well, I guess that's one way to do it. After a sonic fight with the Prime, the Doctor gives her a taste of her own medicine and kicks her into the wormhole like Kirk did with Cruise in Star Trek III, but there's still work to do. He has Allison use the parasite next after he regurgitates it. Sorta gross, but necessary in this situation. Don't worry, Allison doesn't eat it, she just puts it back into the wound it came from, although that's not really better, is it? And he teaches Allison how to use the hive mind to tell all of the Shalka to shut the hell up and vaporizes them. Allison wanted to use the scream to fix the atmosphere more, not just getting rid of the Shalka's gas, but to fix the ozone layer completely. But like Superman, the Doctor believes that humans have to sort out their own problems, because the atmosphere is over there. As the wrap-up begins, Allison and the Master discuss the Doctor and how he's an emotional island because of a great loss, and how the Master ended up in the TARDIS, which I explained a bit about earlier, and the Doctor returns Allison to Jo, but offers Allison a chance to travel in the TARDIS with him, which she naturally accepts, promising Jo that the Doctor will return her to her mother's house, just a few stopovers along the way, where Jo will be heading to, since his house went kablooey, and the Doctor humorously pokes fun at the fact that, as a time machine, Allison is probably already at her mother's house. But when Jo goes to test the theory, she isn't. Which could either be the TARDIS being off by a few days, like it always is, or it could spell some terrible fate set to befall Allison. It's probably the former, though. Kenneth asks to go along as well, but the Doctor refuses, because 4 is a crowd, even in a dimensionally transcendental time machine, and as the story ends, the Doctor, Allison, and the Master go off toward their next adventure, which we'll probably never get to see. The Scream of the Shalka as a webcast is great, but the novelization is even better, I think. Like most novelizations, it brings the chance to expand on the story and give a lot of great descriptions. Although, unlike the novelizations that we usually cover, they didn't have the usual disadvantage of being on a shoestring budget, since animation allows for freer visuals in live action. Like I said at the start, the animation is great for the time, although still very limited, but nothing can compare to the landscapes and creatures that my brain can conjure up. Incidentally, while we're talking about the webcast, I like that the intro put the Doctor's face into it, which we haven't seen nearly enough of in the modern series. I don't care if it looks goofy, I like it, and I want to see more of it. In addition, all of the voice actors do great jobs, particularly Grant, Jacoby, and Okonedo, whose voices all might be familiar to New Who fans, since all three would later show up in New Who. Grant as Walter Simeon and the Great Intelligence, Derek Jacobi as the Master in his later determined to be Time War / Professor Yana incarnation, and Okonedo would appear in Series 5 as Liz 10. Britain only has 6 actors, and they've all appeared in Doctor Who multiple times. The backstory, what little we get of it, is very intriguing. Much like the Revived series did, we get to see the Doctor after a great loss, and how it informs on his actions, even if we don't precisely know what the loss was, unlike knowing about the Time War in the modern series in broad terms. But unlike the Ninth Doctor, who despite his sometimes dour nature when dealing with the Daleks, this Doctor is just here to get the job finished. He's not trying to do grand gestures, not at first. He's trying to give the humans a chance and move on, not making any connections. I think it's really telling, and of course I have no idea if maybe there was an embargo on using Unit or the Brigadier, since they have to pay the Hazeman estate every time they use him, that the Doctor is dealing with the regular military and not Unit, because he can drop these dime a dozen soldiers in 2 heartbeats if he wants. This Doctor is a shell who cares too much, even if he wishes he didn't. According to Word of God, the backstory would eventually be revealed that at some point after Paul McGann regenerated, the Shalka Doctor returned to Gallifrey, fell in love with the Lord President's daughter, and settled down with her. But Gallifrey was attacked by a powerful enemy, his wife was killed, and the Master made a grand sacrifice before all the Time Lords except for the Doctor were forced to give up their physical forms and flee into the Matrix. The Lord President, being vindictive and blaming the Doctor for the loss of both Gallifrey and his daughter, exiled the Doctor once more, but forced him to perform missions, since he is the last link to the physical universe that the Time Lords have. I'm of 2 minds on that premise. On the one hand, it is very intriguing, but on the other hand, I can't see the Doctor settling down on Gallifrey. Earth, maybe, but Gallifrey? Dullest place in the universe? No way. I also love the idea of the Doctor having the Master as a companion, but having him confined to the TARDIS. In fact, I liked it so much when I first heard about Scream of the Shalka, and I have no shame in admitting this. When I used to play with Legos as a kid/teenager, long before I started this show, of course, I modified that same idea by having my Lego Doctor have a Lego Master who was a hologram like Rimmer from Red Dwarf, and couldn't leave the TARDIS until he got a mobile emitter from Star Trek. I know that's 3 franchises right there. My imagination loves crossovers. Speaking of which, I should do more of those. Anyway, the Master is a rich character, and while I love the cackling evil lord, darkly sinister, I like a Master who works with the Doctor out of convenience, but is clearly still waiting for the moment to stab him in the back. At least if he has a chance to, since this Doctor can deactivate him if he gets too schemy. And yeah, in the webcast he's awesome because he's voiced by Derek Jacobi, but even in the novelization, there's still a lot of great pathos to him, as he tells Allison about the Doctor and why he's hurting, and even his remark about how the Doctor should change his answering machine since it still features his deceased presumed wife on it. And the idea of having a slightly still evil Master as a companion is very similar to what was later done with Missy during Capaldi's tenure, but of course this Doctor has a far more control over the situation, and Missy seemed genuinely repentant. Based on solely this, I can't exactly get a good read on whether this Master is truly trying to be good, or just biding his time. We know he's pretty good at stealing bodies, after all. The Shalka's plot is fairly basic: environmental crisis, inspired alien invasion, which has been done to death even in Doctor Who, but for a story that was meant to reintroduce Doctor Who to the mainstream, it does the job really well. It's like like Superman Returns. It wasn't meant to be this amazing grand story that could stand on its own. It was meant to return the Doctor to us. It was meant to be the jumping off point for a whole series, so it feels like setup, but not to the detriment of the story because it still feels complete. Unlike another webcast I can think of, Real Time, which ended on To This Day unresolved cliffhanger. Heck, it's even similar to what Rose eventually did. In fact, there are a lot of similarities to what would later happen on the show. The stuff with the Master, Allison and Joe's dynamic is a lot like Rose and Mickey's was in Series 1 and 2, and Joe is a medical professional with a free-spirited significant other who gets charmed by the Doctor, who doesn't really respect him at first, which reminds me of Rory and Amy's dynamic a little bit, and I really like the way their dynamic works, since we've never really seen the idea of someone choosing the Doctor over a significant other. Like, usually the choice is made for them, like Clara when Danny Pink died, or they choose the significant other, like when Joe left the TARDIS to marry Clifford Jones. If it has continued, I think we'd have gotten to see a very interesting reckoning when Allison had to firmly decide what she wanted out of life, or whether or not Joe would move on while she was gone. There's also the fact that there's shades of the Doctor's dislike of soldiers that cropped up with Danny Pink and felt out of place there, but if it had been immediately post-Time War, or in this case post whatever happened to Gallifrey that killed the Doctor's wife and forced the Time Lords into the Matrix, I'd have understood it as I do here. If the Doctor had just come out of a war, lost everything, his planet, his wife, his freedom, if being dropped off and landed against his will was any indication. Like, yeah, the Doctor lost a lot in the Time War, I'm not denying that. He lost friends, he lost his planet, and he lost his self-respect. But he didn't lose the woman he loved. Or at least if he did, he never talked about it. He was the only one who escaped, but he was free to move around as he pleased. So, yeah, he's a bit annoyed with soldiers, although he softens a lot faster than the 12th Doctor did. As a companion, Allison was very well utilized. She's more in the mold of a modern companion. She's not around to ask the Doctor what's going on or be lectured to. She's very proactive, and it's thanks to her that the whole world was saved, since she could utilize the Shalka to his full potential, unlike the Doctor. As for the Doctor himself, I really like this version of the Doctor. We'd get to see shades of him in other canonical Doctors, but I wish we got to see more of Richard E. Grant. He is a really great actor, and brought a lot to the character, and I'd love to have seen him grow in the role like all the other actors got to. Even if just in audio form. I don't know if there are rights issues with Big Finish, or just that Richard E. Grant's a busy Hollywood actor, but they've got to get him in the studio at some point. They've already got Derek Jacobi, just get Sophie Okonedo and get us a sequel, damn it! The only weakness of the story is that, as the first story featuring the characters, I don't have much to go on in terms of comparing it and knowing if they're in character or not. With other novelizations, I know where the Doctor goes from there. This Doctor has been in stasis since 2003, and it's my only way of getting to know him. And I don't really feel as if I need to sing Paul Cornell's praises, at least more than usual. I've mentioned before that he's one of the big names in Doctor Who, one of the people who truly understand the characters, and he'd been keeping the home fires burning for Doctor Who for nearly as long as it had been off the air, and I have yet to read a story of his that I disliked. And this book is no exception, although I'll say that much like Ben Aronovich 2 years ago, it's always nice when the person who wrote the script does a novelization, since they're closer to the story and they know exactly what they intended, even if it didn't come off the same on screen. Like, I glossed over it, but there are a few pages here and there showing what's going on with the Shalka's other sleeper agents who are in Allison, and it really fleshes out the story in a way that wasn't strictly necessary, but it really shows that it is a worldwide crisis. And Cornell is really great at pacing, and I never felt bored while reading the story. Even though I wasn't really on the edge of my seat since I'd watched the webcast years ago and I knew that everyone came out okay. Scream of the Shalka is a really great novelization, and it's not even all that long. The book looks big, but a good chunk of it is actually a making-of write-up explaining the creative process for the webcast. It only clocks in at about 194 pages, which compared to the other novelizations we've looked at, puts it ahead of the old Target novelizations, which usually clocked in at around 170-odd pages. And it's a good 30 pages shorter than the novelization of the TV movie we looked at last year. And the making of has a lot of really fun trivia in it. like saying that initially the android master was meant to be a holographic representation of a former Doctor. Paul Cornell himself had wanted the fifth Doctor as a comparison in terms of age and temperament because it would be a big contrast. And there's also the fact that, based on the write-up, it seems as if Obdurate Time was determined to kill this Doctor before it was even created, since Cornell's original outline sent to the BBC vanished in the email ether. His floppy drive was busted, so he couldn't put it on a disk and put it in a new computer to send it. He couldn't hook up his laptop to anywhere since he was on his honeymoon and no internet cafe would help him hook his system up. It was incompatible or something. And he was finally able to print out a copy, which caused a little bit of a problem since he wasn't supposed to tell people he was doing Doctor Who, and he printed it at a friend's house. And then he was going to fax it, but he couldn't afford to fax it. Then he was going to mail it, but it would have taken weeks to arrive, which would not have worked because it had a deadline. And it eventually ended up being easier for him to call a friend back in the UK to break into his house and resend the original file from his home computer. And then, of course, Russell T Davies brought the show back on TV, at which point Paul Cornell promptly vanished in a puff of frustration. If it hasn't been clear by all the praise I've been lobbying, I highly recommend the novelization and the original webcast, which is actually available nowadays on a DVD, along with a bunch of other animated Doctor Who, including the reconstruction of Power of the Daleks, Shada, Quiet Tom, and the 2 animated 10th Doctor adventures, which I've actually never seen. So at least the BBC is making it available. And if you like the dynamic of the characters, Cavan Scott and Mark Wright did a short story called The Feast of the Stone, which features the Shalka Doctor, the Master, and Allison, so go check that out as well. There's also a really fun fan comic that meshes together all of the various non-canon Doctors by Paul J. Hanley called The Doctor and I, poking fun at before either of them were the Doctor, Paul McGann and Richard E. Grant appeared in a movie together called Withnull and I, which is incidentally also a very good movie and I highly recommend it. Well, that's 9 years in the can. How about we go for 10? I admit, I'm a little nervous. 10 years. It's a big milestone, but once again, thank you all for watching for the past 9 years, and even if you've only been watching for just this video, I appreciate it anyway. But I do hope you stick around. I've got some fun stuff planned for this year. See you next time. You can probably see where this is going to end, but let's keep going. The Shalka Prime figures out how to You can probably see where this is going to end, but let's keep going. The Shalka Prime figures out how to I don't know why I can't say this. Panopticon as into the black hole against Allison's You know, I wonder if anyone considered while writing this that in under a decade we'd have portable power banks to change our... Motherfuck. Hate it when I can't get that last paragraph. I was trying really hard. So if we compare it to the other Target novelizations, it puts it ahead of them, which... no. And then, of course, Russell T Davies brought the show back on TV, which...